Cedar Fair has been around since 1983, but it really goes back to the beginning of Cedar Point back in the 1870s. One Cedar Point acquired Valley Fair in 1978. They formed a partnership combining the two parks' names, and they were off to the races. They currently own 11 parks and 4 water parks, and for the most part, they have been very stable. Where Six Flags always seems to be grasping for answers, Cedar Fair seems to have figured out who they are and it works for them. However, that doesn't mean they're perfect. And today, let's look at the choices they wish they could have back. These are Cedar Fair's biggest mistakes. Like with Six Flags, I'm gonna go park to park to find their biggest mistakes. But unlike Six Flags, I have very few chain-wide mistakes, and that made up most of the Six Flags list. At the end, I will also go over some of the chain's best decisions, just to end on a positive note. I should mention, 2 of the worst decisions by Cedar Fair parks actually happened before they were owned by Cedar Fair. Knott's Berry Farm was family-owned since inception, and in 1996, they decided to close the wacky soapbox racers and replace it with a Togo looping mouse, this being known as Windjammer. This only lasted 3 years and was shut down in 2000. Cedar Fair took over the park the year that Windjammer opened, and they had the good sense to close it down and replace it with Accelerator, one of the park's best and most popular coasters. The other regrettable coaster is Son of Beast at Kings Island. I would say this coaster is ahead of its time, but even today, I can't see anyone trying to make a 218-foot looping wooden coaster. You might say RMC, but their hypers all have steel track. This was installed by Paramount in 2000, and Cedar Fair didn't take over until 2006. They had just acquired the park when the ride sent 27 people to the hospital, the structure cracking under the track in the Rose Bowl section, creating a massive pothole that jolted riders. Like with Windjammer, Cedar Fair had the good sense to do away with this monstrosity, replacing it with the world's longest inverted coaster, Banshee. Going north to Cedar Point, over their 152 years of operation, they've had a few mistakes. In 2010, they opened a brand new Intamin water ride called Shoot the Rapids. They paid $10.5 million for it, so it was no small investment. They regretted this one from the start. The opening was delayed so Intamin could modify the boats. Once it did open, it didn't get a great reception from the guests. They were even less happy when the boat failed to engage with the lift chain. That happened a lot and it caused a lot of downtime. The park thought the best solution was to front load the boats and leave the back empty, cutting capacity in half. To top it off, in 2013, 7 people were injured when a boat failed to engage with the anti-rollback device in the lift. It slid back, hit another boat, and flipped over. This ride survived all the way through 2015, but that was it, and the park pulled the plug on this disastrous $10.5 billion investment. Let's stay at Cedar Point, but go back to the 1980s, back when they were also working with Intamin, ordering a bobsled called Avalanche Run. They put this right on the beach, an amazing setting for sure. But unlike normal coaster track, these bobsleds acted like giant troughs, where sand would just blow through all other kinds of track. The sand from the beach would blow into the bobsled track and just stay there. The ride had to be shut down ever so often so they could sweep the sand out. They put up with this for 4 years before enclosing the ride, retheming it to disaster transport. This was a good solution, but the initial construction definitely lacked foresight. Now, from an enthusiast standpoint, Top Thrill Dragster was no mistake. It's among the best and most accelerating coasters ever built. But you can't ignore what CEO Dick Kinzel said, and he claimed Dragster was the worst decision he ever made. He said this way back in 2005, so the ride was still pretty new, and it didn't get any better from there. From a business standpoint, there is no doubt the ride has been a nightmare, but 120 miles an hour and 420 feet speaks for itself. Dragster is a beloved coaster. On a more serious note, Cedar Point was in the news last year for its problems with their dorms. Since 2017, there have been 29 reports of assault. The dorms apparently have a party atmosphere where stuff like this can happen. Cedar Point's police department had to take a step back, letting the city of Sandusky handle everything beyond basic park security. I think it's safe to say the mistake here was not getting out in front of this sooner. One more for Cedar Point that spread beyond the park, and that was Vertigo. This was an S&S thrill ride called Absolutely Insane, acting like a slingshot. 3 towers standing 265 feet with a vehicle in the middle, and launched the riders to the top. This debuted at Cedar Point in August of 2001 and operated for the rest of the season. The next January, one of the towers broke about 65 feet from the ground, sending a 200-foot pole crashing down. The park was closed for the winter, and the cold had something to do with it. The cause was determined to be vortex shedding, where, in the cold, the wind blows across the cylinder for a long period of time, causing the pole to oscillate, and it collapsed. Cedar Point removed the ride vehicle for the winter, and it's believed if the vehicle was still attached, it would have absorbed all those vibrations, and this wouldn't have happened. Dick Kinzel decided to remove the ride not only from Cedar Point, but also from Knott's Berry Farm. That opened around the same time as the one at Cedar Point, and it was closed down in March. Kinzel didn't want the PR problem that would come with reopening the ride, so he decided it was best for business to remove them. I'm sure vortex shedding was not on Cedar Fair's radar when they bought these rides, and I'm sure now they regret installing them. Vertigo was not the only short-lived Knott's flat ride. They were one of the many Cedar Fair recipients of the Mondial Windseeker between 2011 and 2012, but this model had some problems. The main issue was the ride stopping during the cycle and stranding its riders. Cedar Fair had to shut down all the Windseekers for investigation. For the last month of the 2012 season, none of them were in operation. The one at Knott's had 2 incidents like this, one leaving riders stranded for 4 hours, and Cal OSHA came in and ordered the ride to be shut down. Cedar Fair reopened all of their Windseekers except for this one. It was shut down and sent to Worlds of Fun, having only spent 1 year at Knott's. Speaking of Worlds of Fun, this is one of Cedar Fair's lower tier parks. Cedar Fair has 4 parks that don't get the same investment as the others, and although it's frustrating for fans of these parks, it's all business. Worlds of Fun, Dorney Park, Valley Fair, Michigan's Adventure. They might get a new coaster every 10 or 15 years, or maybe no coaster ever at all. It's not a mistake, it's all calculated. But for Worlds of Fun, this park opened in 1973 and was themed to Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. Cedar Fair took over in 1995, and over the years, they've Cedar Faired the park. Basically, the themed areas were diluted with Cedar Fair cookie cutter branding, such as the 1950s coaster diner next to Mamba in the Africa section. There is a very detailed rundown of this transformation in a blog post from 1998. I'll share that link down below. That shows just how fast it happened. Maybe it's not a mistake per se, but it's kind of a shame. Moving back over to Ohio, in 2004, Cedar Fair bought Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. This was a very curious move. The chain didn't have any desire to take care of animals. The park was declining. It was very close to the flagship park of Cedar Point. The sale just didn't make a lot of sense. Some people think Cedar Fair bought it just to tear it down, not wanting another company to operate a park so close to Cedar Point. Maybe they did have plans for the park that never worked out. They immediately closed the animal side of the park and built a new water park, and they kept that side open until 2016. But did Cedar Fair really buy this 120-year-old park just to kill it? By 2006, they removed 2 major coasters, X-Flight and Steel Venom, sending them to their other properties, and by the end of 2007, that was it. They spent $145 million in the sale, and even more to rebrand. Was that really worth eliminating the competition and getting a few rides to relocate? It seems like maybe this purchase was a mistake, but that may not be the way that Cedar Fair sees it. One last park to visit, King's Dominion. It seems like they've been riding the B&M train in the years leading up to 2010, but for King's Dominion, they went the Intamin route. They may have been afraid to go with a B&M for King's Dominion, given that Busch Gardens already had a hyper just an hour away, but this Giga was not the answer. You can put this in the same category as Top Thrill Dragster. Enthusiasts love it. It's been thrilling riders for 13 years now, but for $25 million, I'm sure Cedar Fair wanted more. It was too intense out of the gate, making riders black out. In its first season, they had to add trim brakes on the first drop, then tear out and reprofile the first turn. All this hassle still hasn't made the ride popular among the general public, and you haven't seen Cedar Fair go back to Intamin ever since. Cedar Fair's reliance on Intamin between 2000 and 2010 could also be considered a mistake, as Intamin's reliability has never been great, but Cedar Fair liked how they were pushing the limits, and sometimes you pay the price for that innovation. I'm sure if Cedar Fair could, they would go back and at least change the design of I-305, if not order something else altogether. Now, for the one chain-wide mistake that they made, you have to go back to 2009 when they tried to sell the company to Apollo Global Management. This was a way for them to get some extra cash on hand while getting rid of their debts. A deal was in place, but they needed the vote from their shareholders before this deal could be finalized, and that didn't happen. Once the deal fell through, Cedar Fair ended up paying Apollo $6.5 million to reimburse them for their expenses. You would think before committing to this kind of sale, with that financial commitment, they would have polled their shareholders to see what they thought, and I'm sure they wish they would have. Now, let's say some nice things about Cedar Fair. First, some people are mad because they didn't build up King's Dominion over the last 10 years, and it's fallen behind its neighbor, Busch Gardens. Truth is, when they were looking to invest in properties about 10 years ago, they were able to secure tax incentives to develop Carowinds, and they weren't able to get the same perks for King's Dominion. From a business standpoint, they were smart to take advantage and make Carowinds a destination. I still think they should work harder to expand Dorney Park, given how close it is to New York and Philly, but they may have their reasons. Cedar Fair is also far less aggressive than Six Flags when it comes to new acquisitions. Geauga Lake was the anomaly. Normally, they'll bide their time and wait for the perfect opportunity. They paid a lot to acquire the 5 Paramount parks, but look what it did to their portfolio. 3 of those 5 parks are among the top tier of the chain now, and the chain and those parks have been mutually beneficial for each other. Well, except for California's Great America. In 2016, Cedar Fair had to make a decision about Ghost Rider at Knott's. Scrap it, RMC it, or retrack it. They chose correctly, bringing in GCI to replace the track and the trains, and the job they did was nothing short of magic. 7 years later, and the ride is still smooth, giving the perfect amount of bumpiness for a wooden coaster, and the ride has new life. I love RMC, but this layout is so good as it is. I'm glad they were able to preserve it, and the ride is still insanely popular. I mentioned it on the Six Flags video also, but Cedar Fair uses international workers to fill their employment gaps. I won't get too much into it, but when you have a normal or good economy when people aren't desperate for work, it's hard to properly staff a park. Taking part in the International Worker Program, where college kids from other countries come over and work for the summer, that's vital to make the park run properly. Last one. I give Cedar Fair a lot of credit for leaning on B&M for their major investments. This has been the case for a long time. It seems to have really taken off in 2004 with Silver Bullet, 2005 with Hydra, 2006 with Patriot, 2008 with Behemoth, 2009 with Diamondback, 2010 with Intimidator, and after they stopped working with Intamin, it was all B&M all the time. Leviathan, Banshee, Fury 325, Valraven, Yukon Striker, Orion. Almost all of their big-time additions were from B&M, and there's no wonder why. These are capacity machines. They're reliable, they're friendly to the general public, smooth and not overly intense. They are expensive, but Cedar Fair isn't afraid to invest in a quality product that will give them a good return on investment. B&M is a safe bet. Cedar Fair gets this, and it's a big reason why their large parks are doing so well. That's all for this video. Let me know if you have any other things that Cedar Fair regrets, or things they've done well. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you're new here and love coasters, please consider giving me a sub. Also, check out my links below for my Discord server, and my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you're also a baseball fan like I am. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.